everybody. Welcome to episode 29 of the LitRPG podcast. I'm Ramon Mejia, and I'm here to bring you the latest LitRPG news, reviews, and of course, author interviews. And then before we begin, I want to give a quick shout out to our latest Patreon supporter, Jeff Hayes, who's an amazing narrator for a number of audiobooks in the LitRPG genre. So it's nice to have him as a supporter of the podcast. I guess he kind of, figures, hey, audio guy, support a fellow audio guy. But he's pledged $10 a month to support the podcast. So thank you very much, Jeff. And of course, if anybody else in the audience wants to support us there on Patreon, you can do so at patreon.com/geekbytespodcast. On to what we're going to be reading this week, new releases and reviews. I'll be talking a little bit later this episode about Continue Online Part 5 Together. It's the last book in that LitRPG series, which kind of makes me sad because I've loved that journey. I'll also be reviewing the Trap Mine Project, Emerilia, Book 1. And then we talked about a couple Railroad recommendations, also recommended from the audience, but also recommended for you. The Arcane Emperor, and also Life Reset, both on the Railroad. We begin our show, though, of course, with LitRPG news. In LitRPG news, we begin with the story of Luke Chimilenko, author of Ascend Online, a favorite LitRPG novel of mine. He's actually finally started his own Patreon page. I know that's something we've talked about a couple times, but he's offering some pretty nice rewards for people who are supporting him, including some early chapters of both Ascend Online 2 and his new work, Hell to Pay. For Patreon supporters that are at least at the $2 a month level. So I looked at some of the other rewards, and I think he might need to tweak it a little bit, but hey, this is a great way to support a favorite author like Luke Chimilenko in another capacity for folks. So go to his Patreon support page at patreon.com/Luke Chimilenko. We'll have a link in the show notes in case you don't know how to spell that. Okay, also Keanu Chihi is introducing the pre-order for his latest LitRPG novella. It's about 106 pages according to Amazon. It's up for pre-order currently at $2.99. It's the story of Anon, a casual VR gamer who, after questing and exploring, finds that the game is starting to change him. It'll be available February the 15th. We'll make sure to put it in our upcoming LitRPG section as well. Also, Magic Jump Books has released some new chapters of their upcoming LitRPG, The Crystal Sphere. Now, the full novel is set to release in March, so this is going to have to suffice until it actually comes out, although for me, it generally just whets my appetite for more. So there you go. We'll have a link on the show notes, of course, so you can get those new chapters if you're just, jonesing for some more LitRPG in this particular book. It's from, of course, a wonderful author, which we've talked about before. So there you go. Okay, we have a couple audiobook releases in the LitRPG genre. We have Going Rogue, Spell, Sword, and Stealth, Book 3. That's out now. Go check it out. And also Sigil Online, also available as an audiobook as of this recording. So go listen to that as well. They're both great stories. Going Rogue is a fantasy where the NPC characters kind of take the role of regular heroes, and they kind of bite off more than they can chew, but they also find out that their game world is actually something that people from our world play. So it's very interesting, introspective. Sigil Online is that superhero LitRPG, which I enjoyed a lot. Also, had a chance to talk to Alarong Kong recently about his upcoming 6th book in the Chaos Seed series. He answered most of my questions about the book, the state of LitRPG. We just chat about LitRPG in general and the things we hope to see in the future for the genre. And he, of course, also answers a bunch of audience questions, which he was nice enough to do. It'll be the 30th episode of the LitRPG cast, which is the one right after this. It'll actually be produced and sent out into the internets as soon as this one is done as well. Same day. Okay. In upcoming LitRPG, we have The Land, Raiders, Chaos Seeds, Book 6 out January the 29th, 2017. So just in a couple days, folks. You only have a few more days to wait to see if Richard falls off that cliff or not. Also, Spawn Campers, LitRPG Adventure, Crucible Shard Book 2, out January the 31st. Then there's the Nagant Wars, the Ponsdelma. It's the re-release of that one, out January 31st. Then Dungeon Madness, Book 2, the Divine Dungeon series, is out in February at some point. And then there's The Beginning, Dark Paladin Book 1, out February the 7th. And then Questing, February the 15th. That's the one we just talked about. And then there's Viridian Gate Online, Crimson Alliance. That's the second book in that series, out February the 17th. And then there's Spetsnaz, a permadeath lit RPG, lit FPS book, out February the 28th as well. So there you go, folks. That's the lit RPG coming out in the next couple months. Okay, on to new releases and reviews. Okay, new releases and reviews, folks. We're going to begin with Continue Online. It's the fifth and final book in this series called Together, as it should be, because everything comes together at the very end of this book. So there you go. It is 407 pages, $3.99. It is available on Kindle Unlimited. Now, at the end of book 4, our hero and our favorite player, Grant, finally gets a happy ending, and it's a long time coming, in my opinion. I mean, 3 other books. He kind of got, screwed over several times in a row. And he kind of gets the ending he finally deserves. And if the book had ended there, I would kind of be okay with that. But this 5th book also kind of ties up and wraps around all the loose ends and threads from the entire series. And it does a really good job of just tying everything up very nicely. In book 5, Grant he's racing around this world and Continue Online to find a way to help all the AIs in Continue Online to find a refuge before the world is deleted. And it's hard to talk about the book in general without spoiling everything for you folks. It's one of those books, but I can say that books 4 and 5 have done a really good job of just wrapping up the entire story. Any character that you love from the previous 3 books, you're going to get to see them again. You're going to find out exactly what happens to them. Their stories are not going to be untold. Their endings are not going to be unknown. So the author does a really good job of just finishing the whole thing up. And you can tell it from book 4 into book 5, they're both conclusion books. And it's to me sad to see such a wonderful LitRPG story kind of end. But you could tell that the author is, he's had a good run. Not that he's been writing or anything. By no means. He does plan to continue to do so. It's just that this particular series always had a conclusion, I think, in his mind, and this is it. So he... Stephen Morris has mentioned online that he does plan to return to this universe at some point, but not until at least 2018. And in the meantime, he's going to write some non-lit RPG stuff, just to kind of improve his craft a little bit. So I'm sad to see him not write lit RPG, unfortunately, because that's the stuff that I love. But if it's going to make him better, I say, hey, good for you, man. I appreciate your time in our genre and hope to see you back soon as possible. But book 5 definitely gets a huge recommendation from me. And I know it's not this series isn't for everybody. It's a little less combat oriented than other series, but it also does some really cool emotional, psychological development that I haven't seen anywhere else. And that makes it different to me. And that's something that I love, learning about new stories and new ways of seeing technologies, implementation in our reality, and all that prognostication of how tech's going to affect our world, and of course all the good game stuff as well. All that stuff is really cool too. But it does kind of make me sad to see this particular series end, because it's like a bunch of friends that you kind of grow up with or connect with, at least, going away. Even though if you know that they might come back at some point, they're still gone. And book 5 does have some real tearjerker moments. But the very, very, not the end, but the very, very end, past that point, is really satisfying. So I'll let it land there. But I do want to say a big thank you to Stephen Morris for taking me and taking the audience on an amazing journey through his world to Continue Online. And I just want to say thanks for letting me join that emotionally epic trip with Grant, Zen, and of course everyone else. And I definitely look forward to potentially getting an audiobook version of this series some point in the future. So thanks a lot, Stefan. Okay, on to Trap Mind Project, Emerilia, Book 1, written by Michael Chatfield. Now, this book is 516 pages. It's about 160,000 words, according to the author. It is $3.99. It's available on Kindle Unlimited. Michael Chatfield originally published story on the Railroad, and it's now on Amazon. So it almost was a Railroad recommendation for me, but it skipped to Amazon just in the nick of time, so it becomes an Amazon full review. Now, this is my synopsis of the story. The author's is slightly different, but I think this does a good job of explaining it. Austin, the human CEO of Asteroid Mining Company, logs into the full immersion VR game Emerilia. There he becomes Dave, the half-dwarf, a guy just looking to build a home and relax. Little does Dave know that the real world is actually a virtual reality prison created by aliens to manage the rebellious human race, and that Emerilia is a reality forged with advanced technology to mimic Earth's early MMOs. So there you go. That's kind of the premise of the story. In a nutshell, this is just fun. There's a lot of crafting, there's a lot of skill and magic exploration, town building, things like that. And I think that at its core, that's what the story's really about. There's some action stuff. There's fighting, plenty. There's a bigger theme, powers in the world, all that kind of stuff. But the thing that I really love about the story the most is definitely that it's more centered on skill development, exploration of game mechanics, especially the crafting stuff. That's always really cool to me, and it's just fun. I mean, Grant becomes like the only human within this kind of universe to know both sides of that story, and it kind of gives him an advantage, but also changes his motivations and views of the world. Because in the beginning part of the story, of course, he has to balance his, in his point of view, real world life and his game time. And once it's revealed to him that the real world is really the game and the game is really the real world, his priorities shift, and he devotes himself to that universe. And whether it's just an excuse to keep that game card in the world on, I don't really care because it was a fun story. And I love just like the depth that the author took the details of the story, the mechanics that balance out, and the detailed explanations. I love it all. I love the fact that the player's magical ability to conjure objects is based on his real life familiarity with those objects. So, for example, hypothetically, he can conjure beer, which sounds like a fun power. But his first attempts taste horrible because he doesn't actually have any real experience with that particular process, or with, the hops and the, brewing process. And so until he really learns about that, his beer just kind of sucks. But once he invests the time into researching and testing and experimenting, then he can actually magically conjure beer at whim. And then it becomes a really cool power because, you want to get people drunk. Magic beer power. It's one of my favorite abilities in any LitRPG or fantasy novel. Just instead of magically conjuring water, which is like a basic spell, magically conjuring beer seems like a much better power. So it's a fun story. I enjoyed it. It's kind of a nice change of pace from a lot of stories where they're just like combat focused, fight, kill, level up, whatever. So I loved the shift in tone that I have with the story and opportunity. So good job. Thanks a lot. Give it a definite 7 out of 10 as a recommendation. So there you go. Those are our 2 Amazon reviews for the week. Have 2 just quick Royal Road recommendations. The Arcane Emperor and, of course, Life Reset. Now, the Arcane Emperor is 238,000 words, according to the author's preface. It currently has 46 chapters, and of course, it is entirely free on the Royal Road. I have a link in the show notes, or you can just go to the Royal Road and search for the Arcane Emperor. The basic premise of the story is that a person, not even from our world, a person from a world where magic goes where creates a spell that takes into a monster-filled world where he can finally be the arcane mage he's always wanted. This is a fun, combat-oriented story with some really interesting skills, which I wish I had in college, like sleep learning. And it was just, it's definitely action-packed. It's more focused on that direction. And the skill development there is more for killing stuff, which is its own kind of enjoyment. But it's a different tone from the other stories we talked about. So it's a good, fun story. Lots of action and adventure. Also, the other one is The Course of Life Reset, written by Shemerk. These are the Royal Road handles. What do you want me to say? It is currently into its 14th chapter with weekly updates and, of course, free. Royal Road. Can't complain about that kind of stuff. It's basically sort of a high-level player being forced to start over again as a goblin, one of the weakest races in the entire game world. It's an interesting look at a game from the monster's point of view. All the game mechanics are really well thought out, very interesting, super great story. Again, this one is just different, and I love those stories that I can say that about. Stories that don't just tell the same kind of tale of adventure and advancement and fantasy stuff again and again. I've read these other kind of stories previously, but in the past, they've always been the rebirth kind of story. Rebirth monster, rebirth goblin, rebirth arachnid or hive mind, where it's like a person or a character from our world or some other world is reincarnated as these weird monsters or dungeons or whatever. And they're, leashed out RE, colon, and whatever it is. But this one is really just set in a game world, a virtual reality, full immersion game world, and his character, because of some jerk's magic spell, rare scroll, his character is reset as a monster, well away from everybody else, so he doesn't really have to deal with all those other mechanics yet. But it's a very interesting story, very detailed game world. Loved it a lot. And again, I like the fact that it's different, and it's a different type of story, but it's still LitRPG, because that's just possible within our genre. So enjoyed it immensely. Life Reset on the Royal Road. Link in the show notes. Or you can just go search the Royal Road. So that's it. We're done. Short and sweet. 2 Amazons, 2 Royal Road recommendations. There you go, folks. That's it for the show, everybody. If you enjoyed the podcast, of course, you want to support us in any way whatsoever, there are tons of ways to do so, whether it's on Patreon or just, sharing our links to our podcast or clicking on our affiliate links from our recommendation page for LitRPG. All those things help support the podcast and help make it a self-funding project. So I thank you for your support, everyone, and thank you definitely for hanging out with me today. And until I can see you again and can talk to you about the thing that I really love, LitRPG, I always recommend to you guys, folks, of course, to go read some LitRPG. See you later.